Welcome to Genesis chapter 29. We are here and we are doing this chapter by chapter, line by line. Bear with me, the computer is like super slow. Oh my goodness. So today we're going to dive in as we've been doing every week. And I love this chapter. It's a continuation, obviously, of chapter 28. It shouldn't even be broken down into two. I could have, like I said, joined it together, but I wanted to make sure we understand everything that we are reading, not just reading to read, right? And so if you connected with us last week, you can see that this continues the story of Jacob. And let's just read the introduction. The story of Jacob and the beginning of his people, right? Through his bloodline. So Genesis 29 study, the Most High built his house through the unexpected. And I labeled it that because that's truly what happens, right? Anyhow, for Jacob. So this chapter marks the beginning of Jacob's years of refinement. Up until now, Jacob has received the covenant promises from the Most High, but now the Adon begins shaping the man who will carry them. So remember this, I wrote down the deceiver becomes the deceived. And this is because you know what happened. He deceived his brother, or more like his father Isaac, by pretending to be his brother Esau. And now we're going to see that he himself becomes, we spoke about it last week too, but he truly does, it's kind of like that worldly saying, karma, right? What goes up must come down. And I've always said it, like, even in this walk, yes, there's grace and there's mercy and there's compassion and he saves us, right? But there is always a consequence to our actions. And so again, we see through Jacob that he was the one who obtained the blessing through disguise, like I said, and now experiences deception himself. Yet this is not merely poetic justice, it is the loving discipline of the Most High. Jacob's exile is becoming a classroom where humility, patience, endurance, and dependence upon the Most High are formed. And I want to say this, every time that we fail him, he will use, as a good father that he is. If you are a parent, you should truly understand this concept, that we will always discipline our earthly children, right? When they let us down, when they let themselves down, when they do the incorrect, when they take the wrong path, right? The incorrect thing. Not only is there a consequence for their actions, like in the natural, but us as parents will also have a form of discipline, which is what I believe that the Most High is doing during this season with Jacob. So this chapter is also about the beginning of Israel's family through imperfect people, painful circumstances, and complicated relationships. We should highlight that one, right? We see the Most High begins building the nation from which the Messiah will eventually come. So human sin never frustrates his covenant purposes. And that is the thing that I believe should be the focus of this entire study of chapter 29, because it doesn't matter what takes place, his covenant remains, and we see it unfolding right in front of our eyes here in chapter 29. So having said that, I know it's not a lot of you connected right now, but if anyone can volunteer to read, I would truly appreciate it. If not, let me know and I'll just read it myself. And we're gonna read chapter 29 in its entirety, it's 35 verses, and then we'll break it down as we've been doing. I know, Sylvia, you had said you were cooking, so I'm not gonna pick up on you. But if Sharian, is there any way you could read? I have it there on the screen.
I'll read. Which ones?
Can you see it on your screen? I have
Yeah. I'm
29.
seeing it on my screen.
Oh, perfect. You could just read it, and I'll start scrolling up as you read.
Okay.
Um, and I'll tell you to stop if I need you to stop, but I don't envision stopping
Okay.
as of now.
So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field. And behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, My brethren, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. Then he said to them, do you know Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he said to them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, look, it's still high day. It's not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and they have rolled the stone from the wall's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now, while still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it come to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the wall's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it, then it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month.
Well,
Keep going.
mhm.
Okay. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you're my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that behold, it was Leah, and he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Was it not Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in our country, to give her younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service, which you will serve with me still another 7 years. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years.
Okay, let me take a little break here just so I can recap what we're reading. So clearly we see here, I mean, we only have a little bit more to read, but just so we can see the full picture, we see Jacob being in the wilderness, in the spiritual aspect of the wilderness, right? He is in the search for a wife, right? Not of the Canaanite women, as his father Isaac commanded to go back to his father's house. And so he goes to Laban's house to seek a wife. And so here we see him entering kind of like, um, how do I say this? We see a lot of foreshadows here, and I'm going to point to them right now. just so you could start seeing him off the bat. We see Jacob went on his journey, right? So it was a journey. And then we see that behold, he looked and there were flocks. So we see a lot of connections metaphorically connecting to what Israel is supposed to stand by. Remember, Jacob's name later is changed to Israel. Israel is his sheep, his bride, correct? And so we see he comes on a journey and he goes on the field and he finds the flock of sheep, right? He also sees a well, right, watered by the flocks, and a large stone, which we made some connections with Messiah also being a representation of the stone. Give me a second, guys. Hold on a second. Sorry, I can hear so much background noise here, and I'm not sure if the computer's muting it. So I had to like, anyway, bring some order. So where was I? And so now we see some connections here. We see flocks would be gathered there. We see the rolling of the stone on the well's mouth, the watering of the sheep. I don't know if you guys are seeing what I see. I know the storyline has to do with Jacob entering into his brethren's home, like meaning his father's home house from his family line, right? But there's more to it than what meets the natural eye. There's so many foreshadowing connections just in this first half of chapter 29 alone that it's like beyond me right now. I can't even like, I'm like, wow. And so immediately we see that he lays eyes on Rachel. And we're going to make some more connections later as I summarize later with the slides. But there's such a beautiful connection with the fact that she is the second daughter and she's the one that he lays his eyes on first, right? We see that it says here on verse 6, he is well, and look, his daughter Rachel is coming with his sheep. And again, his daughter Rachel coming with his sheep, with the sheep, I mean. But again, very foreshadowing of later what would become of Rachel's children and the generation of her children, right? Um, and then there's a verse here. I know I'm going to break it down later even better, but here on verse 11, then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. We know this wasn't a romantic kiss. I'm assuming it was more of a brotherly, holy kiss, because obviously he had not consummated his bride. But it's almost like he laid eyes on her and he just knew that she would be his wife, right? So we go from that to then the deception that Laban, his relative, does to him. Like he basically promises him Rachel, right? And then we see that on the wedding night when they are feasting, he probably gets him very merry and very dark. I believe in the account of Jasher gives a lot more details on this, how dark it was, and and so it would make more sense for Jacob to be deceived because all he's feeling it's a young lady, which I can imagine they kind of look similar and maybe had similar body compositions. So I can imagine if it's pitch black, and there's a lot of noise. There's this costume that they had to like make a lot of joyful noise as they consummate and they go into their own privacy in the room. I can only imagine he couldn't even hear her voice very well, right? And so that's how he ends up just waking up to this random person, like, yo, this is not my bride, or at least not the one I bargained for. But anyway, now that I kind of gave you a little bit of like a summary of what happened here, we also see that he had to then work an extra 7 years to get Rachel. A lot of times in the movies, we see that they make it look like he had to wait 7 years, but it wasn't so. He only waited 1 week, and we'll see it later in the more specifics that he had to then basically come into an agreement to stay another 7 years after Rachel was given to him as a wife. So he immediately had both of them. So he didn't have to suffer that much. But yeah. So you can continue reading now the last portion, verses 31 through 35.
The children of Jacob. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called him Reuben. For she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. and she called him Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him three sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called him Judah. Then she stopped bearing.
Okay. So let's stop right there and let's start making some connections immediately with verse 1. So, like I mentioned about the journey, we're just going to recap a little bit on Genesis. We saw on oh my gosh, did I close the connections? Oh no, they're here. I'm like, whew, I got scared for a second. All right, so we see Genesis 25, verse 6. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, and while he was still living, he sent them eastward away from Isaac his son to the country of the east. So why am I making this connection with verse 25? Because this is when he sends Ishmael, Abraham's son, away. It's the same direction that he sends, that we see over here in verse 1, the land of the people of the east. So that's where Jacob went, to that same section, that same area. We also see connecting with verse 1, Numbers 23, verse 7. And he took up his oracle and said, Balak, the king of Moab, has brought me from Aram, from the mountains of the east. Come curse Jacob for me and come denounce Israel. Obviously, the context has nothing to do with what I'm trying to connect here. Is more so the mention of this place of the east that's been mentioned here on verse 1. Judges 6, verses 3 and 33. So it was whenever Israel had sown, Midianites would come up. Also, Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. Again, another connection with the people of the east. Verse 33, then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. Now, another connection here is Hosea 12:12, and it's going to kind of come about connected with more later on precepts, but this one reads, Jacob fled to the country of Syria. This is the people of the east that's been referenced here, right? Israel served for a spouse, and for a wife he tended sheep. And again, this is a prophetic foreshadow. It's so crazy because Hosea, it's all about the foreshadow of his bride, the unfaithful bride, right? If you haven't done the study of Hosea, I highly, highly, highly recommend you do it. And if you need some assistance, I do have that study fully posted on YouTube. It's old. It's one of probably the first studies I did on the books of the prophets. But it's such a beautiful read. It's such a beautiful book to study because of all the connections that it has to do with the latter days with us today, being that sheep, being that unfaithful bride, and being redeemed, which is why I put a pin on Rachel to further dig in together as we move on. Okay? So, connecting with verse 2, we have, and he looked and saw a well in the fields, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. And I know, like I said before, this is a literal description of what was happening, but it's also spiritually connecting to so many things that have to do with the Messiah and everything to do with us. So connecting with verse 2, we have Genesis 24:10 through 11. Then the serpent took 10 of his master's camels and departed, for all his master's goods were in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made his camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. And again, we know that we already made that study and that connections with the servant that went to seek out the bride for Isaac. And you already know that was such a beautiful chapter to study because of all the connections, once again, with the bride being a representation of who we are, the church, right? And then I was going to say the husband, but not the husband yet, but more so the husband to be, right? The bridegroom, being Messiah. And so we also have connecting with that Exodus 2:15 and 16. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water, and they fields, the throws to water their father's flock. It's so crazy because everything is they here not by coincidence. We know that in the book of Exodus, it was also very literal. The depiction of what took place while Moses was running away from Pharaoh and all these things and how he found his wife and whatever, whatever. But it's the connection once again with the well waters. And in this case, how he had 7 daughters, almost like a representation of these 7 churches. So we see throughout all these foreshadows, right? Now connecting with verse 4. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. And just to show a couple of places in Genesis where it speaks of this place, we see it in Genesis 11:31. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. So just so you see from where are these people, so they came to a place where the bloodline was still remaining. As well, we see it in Genesis 28:10. Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. And that was obviously last week when we studied that. Now we have connecting with verse 6. So he said to them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Again, I think that's so foreshadowing, guys. I don't know if you guys see it or not, but it's super foreshadowing. Genesis 24, connecting with that, Genesis 43, verse 27. Oh, wait, I skipped. That's why. Wait. Let me go back. So before we go to verse 6, let's connect actually verse 5. Then he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. I guess let me just read it just to confirm. Genesis 24:11. And he made his camels kneel down. No, here. Genesis 24:29 and 29, sorry. So she said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, Milcah's son, whom she bore to Nahor. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man by the well. And again, confirming that Laban is a brother of Rebekah. Rebekah is the mother of Isaac, the grandmother, once again, of Jacob. Genesis 28, verse 2, arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Now, once again, connecting with verse 6, we have Genesis 43:27. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? And obviously, this is later with Joseph, the story of Joseph and his brothers, but it's just like the same kind of language when, obviously they didn't have the communication that we have nowadays. So they would not know, at least not right away, whether people were still alive or not. Genesis 24:11, connecting with that verse as well. And he made his camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And again, Exodus 2:16 and 17, we already read it, but just confirming once again, this has to do with the 7 daughters of representing the wife. Let me see. Yes. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Verse 17, then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So beautiful connection there with that part of Moses helping the 7 women. And again, that's connecting with verse 6. The fact that Rachel came with the sheep, and so were the daughters of Midian. And obviously Moses then attending attending to them, like being a help. Now, I'm going to skip all the way to verse 11, where it says, then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. So connecting with that, we have Genesis 33, verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And that's just to show how this kiss was not a romantic kiss per se. It was more like an emotional kiss, like an emotional hello, like I'm so happy to see you. Exactly how we're going to see later on Jacob when he runs into his brother Esau. That's what this is all about here, the context of this verse right there. And we also have Genesis 45:14 and 15. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. Now this is Joseph, right? And Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. So very soap opera like, right? But that's such a, I feel like a Hispanic thing to do as well. Sorry, I'm Hispanic myself, so that's why I'm saying it's such a Hispanic thing to do because we're very touchy people and we're also very emotional. And that's something that I always say that we do. Like we just hug each other and we have to cry, we cry, boogers out and everything, right? And I'm not saying other cultures don't do it. I'm just saying I can't see it like being like such a cultural thing for us Hispanic, right? So now connecting with verse 12. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Hold on a second. Let me see what you guys wrote here. Trying to open the. Oh, Eileen is laughing. All right. So connecting with verse 12, Genesis 13, verse 8. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Again, this is connecting with verse 12, as well as Genesis 14, 14, and 16. Now, when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So he brought back all the goods and also brought back his brother Lot and his good, as well as the women and the people. And again, I'm making these connections in Genesis just so you see the same language that has been used is the same verbatim, referring to family members as brethren, right? As brothers. And that's exactly how we see Laban here, verse 12. Meaning not Laban, Jacob telling Rachel that he is the father's relative, right? Like meaning kind of like his son. Genesis 28, verse 5. So Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Haran to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Genesis 24, 28. So the young women ran and told her mother's household these things. And this is in regards, not Rachel. This is in regards to actually Rebecca. Because we see similar things, right? Isaac didn't go himself, but Abraham's servant went to search out a bride for him. And now in the case of Jacob, we see Jacob searching out for his own bride, right? Genesis 24, 29, 31. It's connecting with verse 13, so let's read it. And then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And so once again, that connection is here. So the young woman ran and told her mother's house. Sorry, not that one. Verses 29 through 31 here. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man by the well. So it came to pass when he saw the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists, and when he heard the words of his sister Rebekah saying, thus the man spoke to me, that he went to the man, and there he stood by the camels at the well. And he said, come in, O blessed of the Adon. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. And then connecting with that, we have Luke 15:20. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And we know this is a parable of the prodigal son. I know in essence, you may think it has nothing to do with what we just read. However, we know that the prodigal son is a representation of the lost sheep, right? The lost sheep of Israel, meaning the house of Israel. And we're going to see the connection later on with the sheep, or more so the children of Rachel, and this connection with the prodigal son. So that's why I'm bringing it in. And also because of the use of language of falling on his neck and kissing him. It's not a romantic thing, guys. It's more an affectionate love. So verse 14, and Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. This is clearly for a month before he had to stay another 7 years. But connecting with verse 14, we have Genesis 2:23. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. So that expression of Laban came from what Adam had said. And obviously, they weren't husband and wife, but he understood that if you are part of my lineage, of my bloodline, you are the same flesh of my, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And that's, I believe, what he meant. Genesis 37:27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. And later on, this is when they try to sell Joseph as a slave. Actually, before they were trying to kill him, but then his brother came in to rescue him and said, let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites, because at the end of the day, he's our bone and flesh, basically. So he uses again the same language. Judges 9 verse 2, please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reigns over you, or that one reign over you. Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. And again, throughout scriptures, we see the use of this expression. 2 Samuel 5:1, then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. 2 Samuel 19:12 and 13, you are my brethren, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if you're not commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab. And again, this is just to use to point to the usage of bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, to indicate that you are part of my bloodline. So now connecting with verse 15, if there's any questions or anything you guys want to share, please feel free to interrupt, by the way, because I feel like I'm flying through these connections. Verse 15, then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? So now we see, this is after Rachel, after Jacob has stayed a month with Laban and his family, right? Now he's like, okay, you've been here a month, homeboy, but it's about time that you start helping out. Like, you're going to have to split the mortgage, or you're going to have to come with some payments for the utilities or something, right? So that's basically what happens here. And then he basically sells his daughter. I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but in other words, like that's the price that he's gonna give for his wages, right? Because we see on verse 16, now Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the younger was Rachel. And so, because he loved, I'm skipping to 18 where it says he loved Rachel. He said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. So we're going to see how he agrees to that. And then in that case, he would stay with him, right? So, but let's break this down. Verse 15, connecting with verse 15, right? About the wages. We have Genesis 30, verse 28. Then he said, name your wages and I will give it. Again in Genesis 31:41, thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your two daughters. This is actually later on with Jacob, right? And 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. So man, that father-in-law ain't no joke. Just wanted to connect that. Now verse 17, where it speaks about the appearance of Leah and Rachel. It says, Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. So clearly here is giving a distinction. I don't believe it's saying that Leah was ugly per se. I don't think she was ugly, because she was the mother of the 12 tribes. And for what we've read in books like Joshua, they were all so handsome. And I know that Jacob probably was very handsome, but come on. We have to know that the mother wasn't hideous either. So I believe that this delicate here is not saying that she was ugly, but that her, my kids now, the way they speak, I'm going to talk in their language. Basically, what this verse is saying is that Rachel was mugging Leah. In other words, she was the better looking sister, right? In the Septuagint, and I want to read to you what it says, just so we can gain understanding. Oh, where did this go? Give me 1 second. I had it literally like, oh, okay, no, it's here. I'm like, all right, this is just a search. Let me close that. All right, so verse 17 in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Bible, has been less manhandled and conserves a lot more of the actual language. It says, and the eyes of Leah were weak. I know here in the canon it says delicate. In the Septuagint it says weak. But Rachel was beautiful in appearance and exceedingly fair in countenance. So again, I don't think her eyes being delicate or weak meant that she was ugly. What I get from this is more so like she didn't captivate people by her eyes. Like they were not as pretty. Like she didn't have those, like people who have these eyes that they just like capture your soul and you're like, "Ugh, I'm in love with that person," type of thing. I think that's what this kind of meant to say. But we'll to speak about it more. I'm gonna interpret that more with the slides later on. Now connecting with that, verse 17, we also see in Genesis 12, verses 11 and 14. And it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, "Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance." So it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. So they were very good at describing our foremothers, right? How they were like sexy mamas. They were beautiful things. Genesis 26, verse 7, and the man of the place asked about his wife, and he said, "She is my sister." For he was afraid to say, "She is my wife," because he thought, lest the man of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. And again, first we see it with Sarah being said that she is beautiful, and then we later on see it with also Rebecca being stated that she is beautiful. Now, out of the two sisters, Leah and Rachel, Rachel is the one that's been described as this type of beautiful, just as Sarah and just as Rebecca. So it's kind of like she follows more like that dimension of beauty, if that makes sense. So, verse 18. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, "I will serve you 7 years." And again, I believe this is very foreshadowing. The fact that he's talking about 7 years. For we know. Check this out. Everything is about the bride. So we know that Messiah, wait, so day seven, right, is the Shabbat, the day of rest. But day seven in the millennial spectrum of the explanation that Peter gives it as, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. In the terms of creation, day one through day seven, we're talking about 1,000 years each, right? So day seven being the year of rest or the millennial reign, the 1,000 millennial reign, right? And so we see here, "I will serve you 7 years." 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And I want you guys to stay on these little bits that I'm giving you, pointing to anyhow, because it's going to make so much sense later when I bring in my understanding at the end with what I think the distinction between Leah and Rachel and what each represents, right? Because Leah, we know, has an incredible role in all this movie. Even though he loved Rachel more, Leah is the one that brings forward the Messiah through her bloodline. So, but let me not get carried away. Let me continue. All right. So connecting with verse 18, we have Genesis 31, verse 41. "Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. And again, this is, we had already read this, but this is just to confirm that he did indeed not only serve him the 7 years that he first offered, but an additional 7 years for Rachel, which was the original intent that he had, right? And in total it was 14 years plus more. So in 2 Samuel 3:14, we see with David, "So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, 'Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines.'" And this is just showing how these great and righteous men would do things in order to get their wives, right? Hosea 12:12. Again, I'm reading it again. "Jacob fled to the country of Syria. Israel served for a spouse, and for a wife he tended sheep." Are you seeing the connection now with the 7 years, what I said, serving 7 years for Rachel? How he was the original intent, right? Israel served for a spouse, and for a wife he tended sheep. Genesis, okay, so verse 20. "So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her." Again, another foreshadow, I believe, of Messiah himself. Oh, I love it. I just love it. So connecting with that, I just have Genesis 30, verse 26. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. This is later on when Jacob is trying to leave Laban's house. Um, I don't have any other connections there, which I should have, but connecting with verse 21, then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And again, remember this, let me take it back a little bit. Remember, he first is deceived with Leah instead of Rachel. So he obviously is now engaged. I mean, not only engaged, he's committed to Leah. Now Leah is officially his bride, his wife, right? Now, he then goes and says, hey, I gave you, I told you the basically the daughter that I wanted, and you tricked me and gave me this one instead. Um, and then a lot of people think that the whole thing of him working another 7 years for Laban is that he had to wait 7 years to marry Rachel. But no, we see here on verse 20 that he served 7 years for Rachel and they seemed only a few days. But then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. But a lot of people confuse this with him waiting. If you keep reading in context, you see, let me see. On verse, okay, here on verse 27, fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. So fulfill her week. So fulfill her week, meaning wait a week because you were with Leah. Fulfill the week of being married to Leah, and then after that, you can have Rachel. So that's basically what happened. So I just wanted to make sure and clarify that you guys don't get confused, because this is talking about before, verse 21 is before he actually even married Leah by mistake, right? So Judges 15, verse 1. After a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, let me go into my wife into her room. But her father would not permit him going in. And I'm just bringing this in just so you can see the same language when it comes to marriage. The consummation of marriage really meant, let me go into her. So I don't need to break that down. Y'all know what I'm saying there. That's literally what it means. Now, verse 22, and Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Connecting with verse, oh my goodness gracious, what did I do? Okay, connecting with verse 22, we have Judges 14, verse 10. So his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a feast there for young men used to do so. So again, they would give a feast for getting a wife. It's like a marriage, right? The wedding supper of the bride type of thing. John 2, verses 1 through 2. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Yasha was there. Now, both Yasha and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And again, because the entire metaphor of scriptures is about the wedding supper. It's about us being the bride, being reconciled with our bridegroom, right? And it's all about a wedding. The Feast of Sukkot, if you guys haven't observed that, I know some of you that are connected with me have observed it with me together. It's such a beautiful feast to commemorate because it literally represents when Messiah comes back to dwell with his bride. And it's literally the significance of what a wedding is, right? So, verse 24. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. We know that this was, I wanna explain this because a lot of people just see that this is the same exact thing as when Sarah had her maid, I always forget Ishmael's mom's name. Oh my goodness. But her, she, them, she, her, not them. When Abraham, she was given to Abraham as a wife, as a concubine, like as a wife. It's the same thing here when Zilpah is given to Leah. They were basically given to these women to serve them and be to them whatever is it that they were needed to do. Yes, even nurse their babies if they have no milk, even be a womb for them to carry their child. Notice how later when Zilpah has children through Jacob, Zilpah's children are accounted as Leah's children through Zilpah. Does that make sense? So I just want to like bring that in here. Genesis 39:10, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. So you see what I mean? This is exactly what I was giving you a heads up, that these maids they knew their role was basically to serve their lords, to call them that, their owners, right? And they would do whatever was asked of them, and it wasn't seen as a bad thing. They were just doing their job. That was their job, straightforward. Verse 25. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And this is where the word karma kind of comes into play. But anyway, connecting with verse 25, Genesis 27:35. But he said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. And this is going back when Jacob took Esau's blessing, pretending to be Esau. Genesis 31 verse 7, yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. So you see, this is later not Jacob, telling his wife how Laban, her father, had deceived him not only that one time, but 10 times. Woo! Like, because he changed his wages 10 times. Although the Most High never allowed for him to hurt him physically. So we even see his protection and his mercy even through, the discipline. 1 Samuel 28 verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. And another example of the same thing, hold on. This was, the woman saw Samuel, she cried out. Oh, yes. Yes, this was the time that Saul deceived the woman, trying to bring about Samuel's spirit to speak. I remember now. So verse 27, connecting with verse 27. And by the way, that was just an example of people deceiving other people. Verse 27, fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. So there we see the addition of the other 7 years. And connecting with that, Genesis 29. No, wait. I'm skipping. I'm sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. What did I just read? Verse 27, right? Yes. So Genesis 31, verse 41. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock. And you have changed my wages. We had already read that. Judges 14:2. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. And this is later with Samson, and that's not a good thing, by the way. He shouldn't have gotten with a daughter of the Philistines. But anyway, now connecting with verse 28. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife also. So connecting with verse 28, we see that in Leviticus 18:18 it says, this was a law that was added on because of this. Nor shall you take a woman as a rival to her sister, to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive. So the Most High, even though we see that this is what was done with Jacob and the 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah, we do see what came about as a result of this union, right? Which the Most High never ordained. And so we see that specifically it is later added into the Torah, not saying that Jacob was in sin, because at that point it wasn't specifically written or said, but later on I believe is added because of what came about as a result of marrying 2 sisters. And that's just my take on that. Genesis 29:29, and Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. So we see that Zilpah is given to Leah and Bilhah is given to Rachel. And we see later on Bilhah does the same exact thing as Zilpah did for Leah. Genesis 30, verses 3 and 5. So she said, here's my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. And this is exactly what I was talking about, that these women were basically just being like surrogate mothers. They were not seen as perhaps other wives per se, right? Though he would give the treatment of as a bride, meaning the concubine. However, when they would have these children, it was as if the women themselves were bearing the children, which is why Rachel says that she will bear a child on my knees. In other words, she's on the knees picking up a child that she is delivering into her hands, like by another womb. Does that make sense? And then verse 4, then she gave him Bilhah her maid as wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And so this son conceived by Bilhah is almost as if Rachel was having this son through Bilhah, right? Now, verse 30, then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. And this just shows that even in those days, how can I say this in a very PG way? Even in those days, intercourse was not just an act of open your legs, okay? I mean, technically, I'm sure that a lot of times it happened that way because marriages were arranged. However, we see that because he loved Rachel, notice that it says more than Leah. So it's not that he didn't care about Leah, but he really cared more for Rachel. And so it says, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah when he went into her, right? So it's almost like you could see the love, the connection was different than the connection that was with Leah. So it had nothing to do with intercourse per se. There was a soul connection there. So I like to always point that out. And so connecting with verse 30, we have Genesis 29, 17 through 20. Leah's eyes, once again, were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. I also want to see how that reads from the Targums, out of curiosity. Let's see, verse 17. Look at this. Look how it reads in the Targums, Jonathan. And the eyes of Leah were moist, or dropping, running, from weeping and praying before the Adon that he would not destine her for Esau the wicked. And Rachel was beautiful in appearance and of fair countenance. So this adds a little bit understanding here. I'm not going to confirm that it's exactly that because I've never seen that in any other translation. However, this is very interesting. And also look at how in the canon it says delicate. In the Septuagint, it renders as weak, which kind of makes sense with the fact that delicate and weak eyes. I know me, for example, when I cry a lot, when I have lack of sleep, my eyes are droopy and they look puffy. And I guess in a way, in a sense, it makes my eyes look weak. So I kind of see that as the connection with the delicate eyes that Leah had. Maybe her eyes just looked tired. Does that make sense? Like she had she had bags under her eyes, in other words, like, like those puffy bags, maybe dark circles. That's what I kind of get from that. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to read from Targums to see how it rendered. So also we have Deuteronomy 21, 15 through 17. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and they have borne him children, both the loved and the unloved, and if the firstborn son is of her who is unloved, then it shall be on the day he bequeaths his possessions to his sons, that he must not bestow firstborn status on the son of the loved wife in preference to the son of the unloved, the true firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. Notice this specific added law in the Torah later on through Moses. And this is basically because of exactly what happened between Leah and Rachel and their sons. We see later the love of Jacob towards Joseph, which is Rachel's firstborn. It's like unmatched. And so we see that Abba was very meticulous with this. Like if you have two wives and you love one wife more than the other, make sure that you don't, in other words, make a preference with the firstborn of the one that you love, but give the firstborn status of the firstborn of the unloved wife. Does that make sense? Like in other words, like be fair to the other one. And I think that came about because of exactly what had happened. And I want to say this too. This has nothing to do with what we read in Leviticus 18, where it's talked about not having two sisters as brides. This has more as two random wives, by the way. But it's still, I know that it's still, the law is given because also what happened with the preference between their children. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. Genesis 30, verse 26, give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. Genesis 31, verse 41, thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your two daughters and 6 years. And again, we have read this over and over as well as Hosea 12 too. But just connecting all of that with verse 30. Any questions up to this point? If not, I will continue. Verse 31. When the Adon saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And this is very interesting because we also see that not only Sarah was barren, but Rebecca was barren. And now we see Rachel being barren, which are the beautiful women that are described in scriptures and the women they loved, these men loved. All three of them barren. But the one that was unloved was able to bear him 4 sons initially. So let's see, connecting with verse 31, we have Psalms 127, verse 3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Adon. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Okay, so we know that being barren is not a reward. It's more something, maybe a lesson, maybe just a test, because truly being the heritage of our Abba is us having children. Genesis 30, verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. Ruth chapter 4, verse 11. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Adon make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. And this is obviously from the story of Ruth, which is a Gentile that is grafted into his people Israel. But this is what she says in regards to Rachel and Leah, right? Meaning how the house of Israel, like the two women who built the house of Israel all together, the 12 tribes, right? So we know that Rachel obviously did not stay barren forever. Now, connecting with verse 32, again 32, so Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Adon has surely looked on my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. How's that? So connecting with verse 32, we have Genesis 16:11, and the angel of the Adon said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Adon has heard your affliction. And this was the promise given to, I cannot remember her name, but you know who I'm talking about, Ishmael's mother. Genesis 31:42, unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. The Most High has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. And this is Jacob later on telling Laban. But Exodus 3:7, just using like the language of the affliction, right? When the Most High sees their affliction. Exodus 3:7, and the Adon said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow. So in other words, this is all over confirming that he hears us. He hears even when our words don't voice out what we feel. He sees when we're struggling. He hears our sorrows. He knows better than anyone, and he rewards us for us even going through affliction, because that's literally what he did with Leah. And that is so beautiful to see, by the way, and encouraging. Exodus 4:31. So the people believed, and when they heard that the Adon had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked on their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshipped. And what a beautiful way also to us be able to give back to him our worship when we see that he cares for our affliction and he comes through, right? Deuteronomy 26, verse 7. Then he cried out to the Adon, God of our fathers, and the Adon heard our voice and looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. Psalms 25:18. Look on my affliction and my pain and forgive all my sins. And that's just a prayer, obviously, but that should be our prayer when we're going through it. Like, look on my affliction. Look at what I'm going through. Please forgive me. Please just help me through this pain, whatever it is that we're going through. I know I pray like that a lot, and I can feel his comforting strength, like just overtaking me. There's nothing like prayer, guys. Absolutely nothing like prayer. Verse 35, and she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Adon. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. So this is in regards to her fourth son, meaning Leah's fourth son. I'm going to get more into details now when I summarize with the slides with these four sons of hers and the meanings of their names. But notice the praising of the Adon comes from the fourth son, which is Judah. Judah being the father of the bloodline of Messiah. So connecting with that, Genesis 49, verse 8, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. And again, this is a blessing that Jacob later gives to Judah. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Now, Matthew 1:2, let's look at the lineage once again. The lineage of our Messiah. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. And Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. And we know that Judah, from there comes David. From there comes Solomon. All the kings, right, of Judah, all the way through Messiah. Now, my slides. I'm like, where are they? So let's summarize it all. Oh, this is so slow. Sorry, guys. So once again, verse 1. We see that Jacob continues eastward, turning to the land of his mother's family. So this fulfills Isaac's command that we saw last week in Genesis 28 and brings Jacob back to the very people Abraham had once sought for Isaac's wife. Hosea later summarizes this period simply, Jacob fled into the country of Syria and Israel served for a wife. The covenant heir is now a servant. Before ruling over nations, he must first learn submission. On verse 2, we see that Jacob arrives at a well, just as Abraham's servant found Rebekah at a well. Moses would later meet Zipporah at a well. Now Jacob meets Rachel, once again, at a well. So throughout scripture, wells become places of divine appointments and new beginnings. They symbolize life, provision, and the Most High's providence, quietly directing his people. And we also know it signifies what the wells carry, which is water. We know Messiah came to the Samaritan woman, met her at the well, and promised her the living waters, which did not come, in essence, from the well itself. Verses 4 through 6, we see that Jacob discovers he has reached Haran, the same place where Abraham's family settled. The shepherds know Laban. Rachel is approaching with the sheep, and what appears to be coincidence is actually the unseen hand of the Most High arranging every step. Verse 11, we see that Jacob kisses Rachel and immediately begins to weep. These are not merely tears of romance, like I said before. He has left everything behind. He has escaped Esau, who, by the way, wanted to kill him. He has arrived safely after the Most High promised, I am with you. So his tears express gratitude, relief, homesickness, maybe, an overwhelming recognition that the Most High has faithfully guided every step. Now, verses 12 through 14, we see Jacob identifies himself as Rebekah's son. So just as Laban once eagerly welcomed Abraham's servant, he now welcomes Jacob. Laban even says, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." Throughout scripture, this expression refers to close covenant family relationships, as we said before. Yet, unlike the father's embrace in Luke 15, Laban's welcome will eventually prove to be motivated more by personal gain than genuine love. We'll see that as we continue reading Genesis. So verses 27 through 30, Laban requires another 7 years of labor for Rachel. So Jacob, I have a typo here. This is supposed to have a J. So Jacob now has 2 wives. It is important to recognize that Genesis is describing what happened, not describing what should happen. And that is key, okay? Understand the distinction. Later, Leviticus 18:18, like we already read, specifically forbids marrying sisters simultaneously because of the rivalry and sorrow such relationships create. This is one of many examples where Genesis records events that occurred before the written Torah was fully revealed. The consequences of this arrangement unfold through the next several chapters in jealousy, competition, and family conflict. Oh yeah, it's gonna get soap opera very, very, very quick. So Leah and Rachel, and I put a picture, and this is an interesting pattern that I wanted you guys to pay attention to. Jacob first receives Leah, then Rachel, right? So the one he truly longed for was Rachel. Some have suggested this may foreshadow the divided house of Israel. And why do I say that? Pay attention. Leah, perhaps representing the house of Judah or the southern kingdom, right? Who took on Jerusalem and that part of the country. The one truly longed for. Then, I'm reading something else. Leah, representing Judah, through whom the royal line and ultimately Messiah would come. Rachel, representing Ephraim, Joseph's line, whose descendants would become the dominant northern kingdom and later be scattered among the nations in great numbers. Remember when I told you pay attention to the interesting connections with Rachel? Because Rachel bores Joseph, and we know that Benjamin, but in this case we're focusing on Joseph. Joseph being the father of Ephraim. Ephraim been given the blessing of the firstborn later on by Jacob. And not only that, but Ephraim takes on the northern kingdom, which is the house of Israel, the rest of the tribes, right? And so these people, these tribes, the northern kingdom, we know that they are, as a result of the curse of disobedience, they are scattered through the nations in great numbers. And the blessing actually that Jacob gives Ephraim before he dies is that he would become the fullness of the nations. In Hebrew, Melo Higoyim, something like that, right? Paul later speaks about that matter when he talks to the Galatians, or to the Romans actually, in Romans 11. And he talks about the fullness of the nations, when the fullness of the nations has come, meaning that Rachel represents the lost sheep, which is us. I don't know if you guys are seeing the full picture. So while scripture does not explicitly state this connection like verbatim, it is an interesting observation because the story of Judah and Ephraim becomes central throughout the prophets, and the Most High ultimately promises to reunite both houses under one shepherd, as we see in Ezekiel 37. Those who have studied some of the books of the prophets with me know that it always goes back to the house of Judah, and it jumps from house of Israel to Ephraim, because Ephraim overtakes the house of Israel, or the northern kingdom. And that's exactly the Leah and Rachel picture that I see here. Interesting, huh? I want to hear your thoughts. So continuing with Leah and Rachel. Now verses 15 through 20, Laban offers Jacob wages. Jacob requests Rachel's hand in marriage. He willingly agrees to work 7 years. Scripture says those years seemed like only a few days because of his love for her. And once again, there's a connection there with the love of Jacob for his bride, the one he actually wanted to labor the 7 years for. Verse 17 has generated much discussion. And that has to do with the eyes, like I was talking about earlier, but I'll read it anyhow. Many English translations describe Leah's eyes as tender or weak. However, the Greek Septuagint describes Leah more positively, suggesting gentle or pleasant eyes rather than defective ones. though I do believe it's more like, I don't know, tired eyes. So the verse isn't necessarily criticizing Leah's appearance, rather it creates a contrast. Leah possessed gentle beauty, and Rachel possessed striking physical beauty. Like she was a hottie. She was mogging Leah, in other words. So the emphasis is not that Leah was unattractive, but that Rachel's beauty particularly captivated Jacob. Hosea later reminds Israel Jacob served for a wife. The covenant heir learns patience through years of faithful labor. And that kind of reminds me of what Messiah does for us. I don't know. Just saying. This is taking its time. So verses 21 through 24, we see the wedding feast begins. That night, Laban secretly gives Leah instead of Rachel. Along with Leah comes her servant Zilpah. This moment changes the entire history of Israel. The deception succeeds because weddings were conducted at night with the bride veiled. Not only was she veiled, but like I said, there's more details added on in the Targums where we see that the room was completely pitch black and there was a lot of noise. So there's easily you could have been deceived. And especially if they were sisters, I can only imagine they had similarities, right? Oops. I skipped a slide. So verse 25, morning comes, Jacob discovers the deception. The irony is unmistakable. Years earlier, Jacob deceived his own father by wearing another person's clothing. Now Jacob himself has been deceived under cover of darkness. The deceiver experiences deception. The discipline of the Most High often mirrors our own actions, not simply as punishment, but to transform our hearts. And that is facts. Now, I had said a lot of this stuff, so yes, I already said that. So I'm going to just read this, verses 29 through 30. Bilhah is also given to Rachel as her servant, and interestingly, detail later appears in Genesis 31. Rachel and Leah each possess their own tents, while Bilhah and Zilpah share one tent. This reflects their lower social status as handmaids rather than covenant wives. Their purpose in the narrative largely centers on bearing children through surrogate arrangements, and after Genesis, they largely disappear from the biblical story. Even Ruth 4:11 credits Rachel and Leah with building the house of Israel, highlighting the primary covenant role of the two sisters. So that's exactly what I was trying to tell you guys earlier, that the surrogate mothers or the servants, right, that are given to these women are more so to assist them in bearing the children, but the children are ultimately Rachel's and Leah's. And so though he used 4 different wombs, it was more viewed as through 2 wives. Does that make sense? So verse 31, although Jacob loved Rachel more, the Most High saw Leah. He opens Leah's womb while Rachel's remains barren. Abba consistently notices those whom others overlook. Throughout Scripture, he exalts the humble, the rejected, and the forgotten. The language that Leah is hated does not necessarily mean Jacob despised her. In Hebrew, it often describes one who is less loved or treated as secondary. So in other words, it's like, I don't like you as much, but I still like you type of thing. So this idea aligns with Deuteronomy 21:15 and 17, what we read before, which addresses a household with a loved wife and a less loved wife. The law protects the rights of the firstborn son of the less loved wife, showing that although a husband might favor one wife over another, the Most High does not permit injustice because of the preference. So isn't he fair? He's amazing. Leah had done nothing to deserve her diminished place, yet the Most High intervened on behalf of the one society valued less, demonstrating his concern for the afflicted and his commitment to righteousness even within broken family situations. Now, verses 32 through 35, we see Laban requires another 7 years of labor for Rachel. Leah names her sons according to her experience. I think this is, by the way, this subtitle wasn't supposed to be there. But anyway, it's about the names of her sons. So Reuben, the Most High has seen my affliction. Simeon, the Most High has heard. Levi, perhaps now my husband will be joined to me. Each name reflects her longing to be loved, finally comes Judah. Instead of focusing on her pain or Jacob's affection, Leah declares, "This time I will praise the Adon." Isn't that beautiful that that is exactly the one son? When she decides to praise him, no matter what, that is the one bloodline that brings forth the Messiah. Isn't that beautiful, guys? I don't know. It's just amazing to me. So her attention shifts from seeking approval from men to worshiping the Most High. And this becomes one of the greatest turning points in Genesis. From the woman who felt unseen comes Judah. From Judah comes the royal line. From Judah comes David, and from Judah comes the Messiah, as we read in Matthew 1:2. So the rejected wife becomes the mother of the king. The Most High repeatedly chooses what the world considers weak, overlooked, or unlikely to accomplish his greatest purposes. Oh, yes, DD is saying, I always thought why the father allowed the switch with Leah, since Rachel was the one from the beginning that Jacob always wanted. But you just gave me the answer. It was probably so Jacob experienced from the other side what he'd done before. Oof, yes. And not only that, I also see, like I said, the compassion that he shares for those that are afflicted. Like it wasn't Leah's fault, right? These women had no say in these days, right? Like the father said, "All right, you're next. You are, all right, cool, I'm your bride." But imagine as a woman feeling like the lack of love, the as a woman, even if you weren't in love originally with this man, knowing that he's your husband, but that your husband has eyes for your sisters, ouch, that has to hurt. You know what I mean? And I feel like she had these three sons almost like, almost as she's trying to win his love through her bearing of sons, right? And then she sees that none of this still gains his love. So when it comes Judah, you see how she changes, which is the shift that takes place. It's like almost like saying, like, I'm gonna praise the Most High. I'm gonna praise the Adon, and that's what Judah means. And so from that point, I believe there is a also shift. Not only does he care for the afflicted, but he sees the prostration of her heart, more like the surrendered heart. Like, you know what? I don't even care. I'm going to praise you because you're giving me these children and I have this beautiful family. So I'm going to praise you. And from that heart, from that spirit, because that's a fruit of the spirit, then he shows this is where my son is coming from. I don't know. That's kind of like how I see it. Like he just does these beautiful things. Like, yeah, she's saying this blew my mind that from Judah came David and the Messiah and the meaning of the, wait, I lost it. Where was it? And the meaning, oh, of his name. When she decided to just praise the Father, yes, and not even thinking about Jacob, what he did from that. Yes, it is, right, Eileen? It's so beautiful. Like that connection to me, reading Genesis again with that like mindset, like that perspective brings so much more like, wow, bro, like that makes so much sense. Like, why would he pick Judah as opposed to Joseph? But we also see the connection with Joseph. I'm telling you, everything just beautifully connects because Rachel is the one that he originally loved, right? Joseph is the one that is sent to Egypt to exile. And what are we? The bride that he's serving for these 7 years. Remember what I said, the 7 years of creation? The lost sheep, the one that he actually sent his son to die for, to bring back into the covenant. It's almost like we represent Rachel's bloodline, right? Obviously, Judah, yes, Leah represents the line where Messiah comes from. We are represented through Rachel. We are represented through the loved bride, the one that was barren. We are represented from Joseph, the man that served him, yet was like landed in Egypt and then his children later were scattered through the nations. So I don't know, bro. It's like it's so beautiful. The connections are so beautiful when it comes to that. And in a nutshell, let's wrap it up. Genesis 29 teaches that the Most High is at work even in life's painful and complicated moments. Jacob learns humility through being deceived. Leah experiences rejection yet receives the favor of the Most High. Rachel receives Jacob's greatest affection but must wait for children. Laban pursues his own advantage, yet even his schemes cannot overturn the covenant plan. What appears to be a story of family conflict is ultimately the beginning of the house of Israel, meaning the entire house of Israel, the 12 tribes, right? Through broken relationships, delayed hopes, and human failure, the Adon faithfully advances his promises. One of the chapter's deepest lessons comes through Leah, like we talked about. The woman who was less loved became the mother of Judah, and through Judah comes Messiah. The Most High often works through those who the world overlooks, reminding us that his purposes are not determined by human preference, but by his sovereign grace. Jacob arrived in Haran seeking a wife, but he found much more. The Most High was shaping the covenant heir, building the family of Israel, and quietly preparing the lineage through which the promised Messiah would one day enter our world. And with that, we end chapter 29. About to enter chapter 30. Oh, more than halfway there. Excited for that. So thank you for breaking bread with us, and I shall see you guys next week through the same channel and at the same time.